thank you for, can you hear me okay if I don't hold the mic? Or, no? All right, so I'll speak up. Thank you for the opportunity. I take it all the time to have get the chance to talk about pipelines and energy infrastructure in general. It's 145 days, if you were counting, until I retire. So, I always ask Siri once in a while. She reminds me just how few days it is. Now, my wife's ready. We live full-time here, but I have an apartment downtown. It's a little hard to drive that every single day, as many of you have probably tried, but I drive it a lot. I'm looking forward to not doing that anymore and just being here full-time. But I want to talk a little bit about energy infrastructure. It'll have something about Kinder Morgan in it, but you know, you've heard about DAPL and Keystone and the opposition, and it's kind of a one-sided story out there. And what I would like to do is just talk a little bit about how important energy is and to our lifestyle and the things that we do, the economy, you know, jobs. I mean, if you don't have inexpensive energy and plentiful energy, kind of life as we know it won't exist. And I'm not trying to overstate the matter, as you'll see as we go through some of these slides. But what I want to do is start talking at a very high level, maybe 30-mile level, look at pipelines, and then get down a little closer. And when I conclude, I just want to look at pipelines around Livingston, Texas. But there's generally three kinds of pipelines in America that are related to energy. There's natural gas pipelines, heavily used now in generation of electric power, certainly heat homes and for factories and chemicals. There's natural gas distribution lines, which would be your CenterPoint or other kinds of companies that go directly to the houses. And then there's hazardous liquid pipelines, which is kind of the business I'm in, which is jet fuel, gasoline, diesel, crude, NGLs, like propane. And you know, we work to make pipelines as safe as possible. The narrative often isn't very favorable. People focus on really big incidents. But in the United States, in 14, and that's the latest year that I have data, I think it was 15, there were, I think, 17 deaths related to pipelines. There's 2.6 million miles of natural gas and liquid pipelines across America. And while any death is too many, and the industry works relentlessly and tirelessly to have no deaths. In fact, there were none on liquid pipelines for the last few years. But industry works tirelessly to get to zero. Unfortunately, things can go wrong, things you couldn't have known or couldn't have predicted. Then you go to an emergency response, and we join first responders with a lot of planning on what do we do in those cases. But we try our best to make it extremely unlikely that a serious event would happen. But in this map, you can see the United States is just crisscrossed with pipelines. And I think the red on this one are hazardous liquid. All the blue lines are natural gas pipelines. And these are generally just gas transmission. This doesn't include distribution lines, which would cover the whole map where you couldn't even see the United States if we did that. And you guys have all heard about shale plays in the United States. And most of you probably aren't aware how prolific shale production is for natural gas and for natural gas liquids in the United States. But it's almost everywhere. In fact, it's this way worldwide. There's a lot of petroleum products in the shale where they use unconventional ways to recover gasoline. Fracking, one of the things that's had some notoriety lately. But when I look at this map, there's some things that jump out at me. Any of you see anything there that kind of comes to you from just looking at that map?
The West Coast doesn't have it.
It's what?
The West Coast doesn't have it.
They have a little bit. Actually, California does produce some shale, but in fact it's used in some of the refineries in Los Angeles and other places. But that's one. It is kind of centered in the U.S. Anything else jump at you? A lot of money in it. Generally, the gas production and oil production is not where people live. It's generally in rural areas. And what closes the gap between where people live, where these products are used, and where products are produced are pipelines. So this is Kinder Morgan's network. So again, starting off at all pipelines, getting down to just the pipelines that Kinder Morgan is involved with. And it's about 84,000 miles of pipe, about 70,000 miles of high pressure, large diameter natural gas pipelines. That's the red. The blue lines are gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel. We move about 2 million barrels a day of refined products in California. The line that goes up to the southeast goes to Washington, D.C. from Baton Rouge. It's about 700,000 barrels a day, of jet fuel, gasoline, and diesel. Places like the D.C. airport, Reagan National Airport, solely supplied by that one pipeline system. And then the maroon lines are NGLs, like the one that goes from Detroit, Chicago, back up to Fort Saskatchewan, is moving natural gas liquids. And you've heard of oil sands. I mean, they produce oil out of nearly tar or dirt, and it's too thick to flow, so they use natural gasolines to dilute it, so it'll eventually flow on a pipeline and get to market. When they refine it back, they send the natural gas pipelines back to be reused as diluent. So it's a very complicated process. And we have some other crude lines in there. There's one out of North Dakota that comes down into Guernsey, Wyoming, and then Wink system in West Texas, that's Permian. And then you see some really light blue or kind of turquoise lines there from Colorado down to West Texas. That's carbon dioxide lines. And they're moving carbon dioxide in a liquid form, and then they get it to West Texas. They inject it as vaporizing CO2, and it helps recover oil from depleted oil fields. And very successful, very profitable business, but we're the largest producer of carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery. So it's a very interesting business. I've been in it for about 42 years. I spent 30 years on natural gas pipelines and about another 12 into the liquid pipeline systems. They can have pretty spectacular accidents, but they're extremely rare. They're on the news, but generally they're in rural areas. But again, the industry is working to get that to zero. And we ourselves spend tens of millions, probably close to 100 million a year, just pigging lines and repairing and refurbishing and keeping them like new. These are the liquid lines that, so it's just, once again, coming a little closer to what I do. We move a lot of jet fuel, gasoline, and diesel, and very needed infrastructure for all of our economies. Not a lot right in the center U.S., but again, that's not where big population centers are. So, talking just about the petroleum industry in general, and you don't hear this story on the news very often, but our way of life would not exist without fossil fuels. There are big movements out there to keep it in the ground, never produce it, but we generated 67% of the electricity last year using natural gas. And in 16, natural gas suppressed coal, which is still a fossil fuel, still pretty widely used, especially in Texas. Wind and solar, 5% of electricity. So you could double, quadruple wind and solar. It still doesn't make an impact in the energy needs of America. And we support all of those things, but this idea to just turn off fossil fuels, it just can't be done, and it's misinformed. 99% of U.S. light vehicles run on gasoline or diesel. Electric vehicles are less than 2%. And the problem with electric, and I actually have some people that work for me that have some, I give them a lot of trouble about that, but you can have a range of about 160 miles, and most of us can't get by with a range of 160 miles. Can you imagine when you get to about 100 miles, you're starting to look for some place you can recharge a vehicle, and it's just going to be very difficult. And on a standard receptacle, it's going to take you about 10 hours to charge 20 miles of driving power. So you have to go to super recharging facilities. And while they have a place in the economy, they're not zero emissions either, because generally their gasoline came from fossil fuels creating electricity. Plastics and chemicals. All plastics come from petroleum or natural gas. And so, the dash in your car, all the plastic in your house. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, well, we shouldn't have that plastic. Well, medical supplies. All these things come from natural gas or petroleum products. And a lot of it off the Houston Ship Channel. They're creating these things constantly in slightly refined to fully refined to final products. Clothing. This person was arguing with me the other night that we ought to just leave it on the ground. I said, we'll be sitting there pretty exposed or naked. And again, she was passionate about it, but she was not well informed about what the effect is of trying to turn off these fuels in short order. In agriculture, almost all the fertilizer used in the U.S. comes out of petroleum products. Fueling America's growth, you can see from for over 100 years, fossil fuels have been over 80% of the U.S. energy consumption. Started off heavily with wood, and then in the mid-1800s it went to coal. Petroleum began to replace coal. It's still wavering at about 20% of our energy in America comes from coal. Natural gas, you can see that line just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And then nuclear and other renewables, they're really not in a growth mode, but they're still important fuel sources. But natural gas is headed to be the fuel of the future. It's inexpensive, it's abundant, it's domestic, and it's clean. So natural gas is just a powerful force in America, and it's coming out of those shale developments. And we pay incredibly low prices in America for energy. Natural gas, I already touched on this a little bit. It's cleanest burning fossil fuel, much less emissions than coal or fuel oil. Fuel oil, by the way, is the most expensive energy you can get. It's out there. Some plants still burn it, but it's the most expensive source you can have. While in 2015, the CO2 or greenhouse emissions were the lowest since 1993 in spite of a 28% increase in demand for energy. So as the growth in demand has gone up, greenhouse emissions have gone down, even though the demand is much, much higher, and that's coming from natural gas. And then U.S. methane emissions, that's another thing that's watched for greenhouse gases. A leak of methane actually is about 4 times worse than a molecule of CO2. But those have decreased 6% despite a 46% increase in natural gas. U.S. oil and gas reserve, they're just continually growing. Natural gas reserves are the blue line, crude oil reserves are the green line, and we've got more proven reserves in America than we've had in decades. And the cost to produce this oil keeps getting lower. So as the refiners and the producers across the country have seen lower and lower prices for their product, they become more innovative in how to produce it at a lower cost. So you can see the break-even cost in 2015 were those green lines. People needed $51 a barrel or $53 a barrel. Today, the break-even cost on a well and it's got different shale plays along the bottom, but it's right around 32 to, as high as 44. So producers are becoming much more efficient, and that lets them produce even in a difficult price environment. And just a slide here on infrastructure. This is one of the pipeline projects we built about 4 years ago. We converted a 30-inch line, which starts about where the K is on KMCC, goes to Houston, goes around the Beltway 8 and into the Houston Ship Channel. And we built a 65-mile extension with a truck offloading rack and a tank. So what happens is people in the Eagleford area produce, they pick it up from the wells and trucks, they bring it to a tank, and then we move it to Houston. And that was a $220 million project, and had about a 50,000 barrel a day commitment. So you have to have a commitment before you spend $220 million. But we began to keep expanding as demand grew and production grew. And I'm going to go through these really fast. But we built one 50,000 barrel a day splitter in Galena Park. And what that does, it takes natural gas, condensates, and breaks them down into naphtha, jet fuel, more valuable products. We doubled that to 100,000 barrels a day of processing. We built an extension down to the Phillips 66 refinery. We bought from Copano, some of you probably heard of that, their system, and that included a natural gas liquid or condensate system that goes to Corpus. We built an extension down to Helena, Texas. Then we connected the two systems together, and then we built a Gonzales lateral and another Marshall lateral, so every time somebody had more production, we would add to what we were building. That's over $1 billion worth of infrastructure, and this week it was running at 280,000 barrels a day, moving from South Texas to the Houston Ship Channel. And all those chemical plants along the ship channel want these products, and it provides inexpensive feedstock, lots of good jobs in this, and astonishing. If you could think of the logistics to have all those trucks, and most of it's done by truck, coming to all these offloading facilities, relentlessly unloading, scheduled on our pipeline system to the Houston Ship Channel, 280,000 barrels a day. It's got an ultimate capacity of about 360,000 barrels a day. This is what the splitter looks like. Two refineries. They look small, but those are about 300-foot towers in each of those facilities, 50,000 barrels a day. The three big tanks are feedstock coming in. The big tanks and the spheres back in the back are for breaking it down into the more valuable products. Nice shot of it at night. So I'm almost done, but I promised we'd start at a very high level and work our way down through the various levels to Livingston, Texas. There's the pipeline map I had one of my guys pull up and create just for this presentation. The red lines are Kinder Morgan pipelines, the blue lines are others. Now those aren't including distribution systems. Some of that's gathering for crude and natural gas, but Livingston is surrounded by pipelines, yet you don't hear about them very often. And when you do, it's a pretty significant event. Again, we're working with first responders all the time. One more thing I'd like to share is calling 811 before you dig. How many of you are familiar with that? So when I finish, I hope all of you are. If you go out and dig without dialing 811 48 hours beforehand, you can have a disaster, especially if you go rent a backhoe and go do it. And, we've had people, farmers hit our lines, thankfully no fatalities from it. But it's the most dangerous thing you can do is go start digging without calling 811. That's a nationwide number. It's always free. People will come out and locate the lines. And in fact, I'm on the board of directors for this national organization. It's a charitable organization. But we relentlessly want to have the best practices and educate people to dial 811. And even if you're going to put a mailbox up, you probably won't get killed doing that, but you might cut a cable that you have to pay to have repaired if you did it. So it's free. And in fact, it's not only free, it's the law. You have to dial 811 before you start digging. And so every project, every excavator has to make their own call. And in my consequences, every 6 minutes an underground utility line is damaged because someone decided to dig without first calling 811. So if I could do anything today, let me just impress upon you, and you impress upon your neighbors, that it's the law, but it's also good for your health. It's not just pipelines. You get into a big electrical line accidentally with a shovel, and it could be disastrous. And so it's free. Please use that. So I'm going to finish because I know you guys are all busy, but 2017 looks like oil prices are recovering a little bit. We don't anticipate a huge recovery maybe until 2018. I'd like to leave you with the thought that pipeline infrastructure is essential to our economy. And having been in it and trying to build projects in different parts of the country, I mean, the opposition is trying to think of the right word. The opposition is well-funded, it's passionate, but it's ill-informed. People don't understand that without some of this infrastructure, you're going to be trying to haul energy in trucks across the country or rail, and you can never move the sheer volumes of energy that pipelines can. And then I'd like to just talk about safety culture and continuous improvement. I'm on several committees in the industry, and I can tell you, all my comrades and other pipelines, they share the vision to get accident rates lower and lower and lower. And so certainly the industry has regulators, but they self-regulate too. And we're trying to provide the needed energy, but also in the safest way it can possibly be done. So with that, I'm going to quit. I'd be glad to take any questions about the industry. I think we had one back there, but go.
Ron, can you give us your take on the explosion at Refugio last week?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. The question is about the incident that was on the news in Refugio, Texas last week. Now, again, I'm on the liquid lines for Kinder Morgan. That was a Kinder Morgan natural gas line. And it was a line they were working on. They had found an anomaly they wanted to repair. The anomaly did not threaten the operating pressure of the line. But while they work on it, they reduced the pressure, which is really puzzling that it had a failure that night. And I actually checked in with the gas controllers, and they were maintaining the pressure below what they had reduced it to for safety. It's very often you can have something that you don't like the looks of from a smart pig that traverses the line, and so you immediately reduce pressure, if it's significant enough, by 20%. And that's kind of the same effect of having done a 125% pressure test on using water, hydro test. And really, that's kind of reciprocal of 125%. And so anyway, they were quite puzzled. Now what happened that night, torrential rain. And they had 240 feet of pipe exposed. Now you don't just dig it up and let it hang in midair. They leave bridges of dirt and put timbers, and they also leave bridges of dirt over the pipe, so it's held in place and it's exposed in sections of that 240 feet. But they think maybe that contributed. Maybe some of the support washed out and it sagged, or that it tried to float in the ditch, if it filled up with water. Some of these pipes are pretty deep. And it was a 36-inch pipe, which is a very large, high-pressure pipeline. And so while they're still investigating, they don't think it's related to the anomaly that they were in there, or anomalies they were going to fix. Something else went wrong, and it was probably related to it being exposed. Now, I would still ask the question, well, why weren't you there watching what was happening if it was raining? But I haven't heard the results of that. But, big fire, no one was injured, and so that's the story on that. Yes, sir.
With the natural gas prices being so low, why aren't they more natural gas vehicles than what they are?
Well, the question is, why aren't there more natural gas vehicles? It's fairly impractical to refuel them. And so what happens is you have natural gas to your house that you think you could put in a vehicle, but it has to be at about 3,000 pounds of pressure to have a significant volume in a tank. So you're carrying tanks in the vehicle that are rated for 3,000 pounds, 4,000 pounds, but you can't just take a few pounds and compress it up to 4,000 pounds. You'd have to go through many stages. The gas would get hot. You'd have to have interstates cooling. I don't know if you've ever, same thing with high pressure air compressors. So to do that practically, you need to be tapped off a very high pressure pipeline. Maybe start with 1,200 pounds, and you can do that. Now, some cities are doing that with their buses and bigger fleets, but for small cars, it can be done, but it's a little bit harder. But I think that's coming. I mean, natural gas is just too cheap right now. It's I think $2.80 an MCF, tremendous amount of energy and value.
Yeah, I worked for CenterPoint Energy.
Yeah.
And I drove the truck for 15 years, and I was amazed how clean. At 100,000 miles, that motor like it's never been used.
But you can look at our fuels, I mean, from even gasolines, back when they were leaded, I mean, engines were terribly dirty. Unleaded fuels are much, much cleaner, and natural gas fuels, they just are perfectly clean. And that's the way it burns in power plants and what have you too. It's abundant, it's domestic, it's clean, and it's cheap. Good power.
Is Kinder Morgan involved in LNG export?
We do have an export effort. Years ago, you probably remember hearing about Elba Island. That was it built to be a natural gas import facility when we thought we were going to have shortages in the country for natural gas. And we're spending $2 billion there to turn that facility around to take natural gas, chill it, and liquefy it and export it. And I think it's a couple years away from being in service. We have another one that's a little further behind. There's a few doing it right now, but so all of these facilities were built to import. They're all being turned around to export now.
What kind of quantities of export are you looking at? What kind of quantity of export are you looking at?
Well, it's pretty big. I mean, these vessels are very large. I wish I had the number. I've heard them recently, how much natural gas is currently being exported, but it's about to be a lot more. We have something of a glut of oil, but we really have a glut of natural gas. And until you open up markets, it's hard to produce. Maybe one more. I don't want to take too long. So,
Are we energy independent?
we're
Do we
not
have to buy
independent.
from other countries?
Independent's not the right word.
Okay. No.
We're energy balanced. We produce as much energy as we need, maybe a little more. But a lot of the oil we need in Gulf Coast refineries is heavy. And a lot of what's produced in the United States is light. And so these refineries, you can't just change them to operate on light crudes and have the same production rates. So often we're exporting lighter crudes and importing heavier crudes. I mean, these crudes on Keystone, that is crude that exactly lines up with what the Gulf Coast refineries expect to see, heavy crude. And over time that may change, but so we're not independent. We need some of that heavy crude as we export, but we're in energy balance, or maybe a little better. We are probably exporting a little more in energy than we're importing right now.
Good answer. Okay.
All right, I'll be around for any questions.
Thank you. That's great.
I take all of these opportunities I have. And,
Very interesting. Huh?
Call 811 before you leave.
Thank you.